So I'm going to explain why I believe that the traditional interpretation of Daniel 7 is not the correct interpretation. So traditionally, like the last video which should be up, I talked about how the lion represented England, with eagle's wings represented England and the United States, and Russia represented the bear. And then I didn't really talk about what the last two beasts were. As far as I remember, I might have, but I don't really remember. I know the last beast is something that hasn't shown up yet. Now, the traditional interpretation of these four beasts is the lion is England. No, I'm sorry, not England, but Medo Persia. No, I'm lying again. It's the lion represents the bear is supposed to represent Medo Persia. The lion, which is the first beast, is supposed to represent Babylon. The leopard with four heads is supposed to represent Greece, and the last one is uh, supposed to represent Rome and the revived Roman Empire, or the last empire, something to that effect. And there's several reasons for this. Okay, it's the traditional interpretation for a reason. It's not like it's irrational, but I'm gonna just get into why a lot of people accept it. For one, it's the mainline view, and it's the mainline view when nobody really investigated the alternatives very thoroughly. There's a few people, but I'm just saying for the most part, not too many people invested the alternative thoroughly. And since it's the mainline view, and a lot of respected people believe this, then people are going to take that theory more seriously. Now, that has nothing to do with whether something's true or not, but that's just why people take that theory more seriously. That's one. Number two, it's because these nations have very strong ties to Israel. And when you deal with Bible prophecy, you're dealing the traditional, um, the traditional interpretation. The beasts that the nations that are attributed to the beast traditionally have a strong ties to Israel, meaning that they have a strong, they have a heavy, they played a big role in Israel's history, or they had some ties to Israel. That's number two. Number three, Daniel, Daniel just, for the most part, pretty much dealt with world empires. So in chapter two, chapter two just pretty much deals with world empires. Chapter eight deals with Babylon, and then the other kingdoms. Then you have Babylon, and then the brass kingdom is described with a world empire, and then the last kingdom is known to be a world empire. Daniel 7 talks about the last kingdom being the world empire, the 10 horn beast with iron teeth and brass nails. Then you have the next chapter, chapter 8, deals with world empires, as it says that the ram represented Medo Persia, and the Greece represented the ram, and the he goat. Ram represented Medo Persia, and the he goat represented Greece. And then the last chapter talks about Medo Persia and Greece, and deals a little bit with non-world empire nations, but not a whole lot. So it talks about Ethiopia and Jordan and Egypt. So, but it doesn't really talk about them that much. But so for the most part, Daniel's deals with world empires. And Daniel 2, especially Daniel 2 and Daniel 8, those pretty much exclusively deal with world empires. So it's believed that Daniel 7 is, since Daniel 7 has strong ties with Daniel 2 and Daniel 8. Now, Daniel 2 is said to have ties with it because you have the four beasts in Daniel 7, and then people break down the statue into four parts. So the statue has a head of gold, the chest of silver, the belly of bronze, the legs of iron, and the feet of iron and clay. Now it could be broken up into 5 or 4 parts depending on how you look at it, and I can see how it's reasonable to do it either way. Sometimes people break down the legs of iron and the feet of iron mingled with clay. It's the feet of iron mingled with the feet of iron and clay being an extension of the iron, the legs of iron. So they say that's four, and they believe that's four. I think partly because of the four beasts of Daniel, but and partly because how it's written too, how Daniel 2 was written. But I personally believe it's five. I personally believe that head of the head of the head of iron is I'm sorry. I believe that the feet of iron mixed with the feet of iron and mixed with iron and clay are a separate nation than the legs of iron. But it's not something I'm really to argue about. So there's that. Then you have also the 10 heads, the 10 toes in that of the statue deals with the 10 horns of that 10 horn beast. Then you have the iron teeth of that beast, talking about with the iron, with the iron legs and the iron and clay feet and toes. Then you have the brass nails of that last beast with the brass belly with the statue, and of course it's a world empire, and all those nations, um, all the medals in the statue are associated with kings of the world empire. Then you have it's associated with Daniel 8. So you have the little horn in Daniel 7 and a little horn in Daniel 8, and then you have the four horned ram, the ram with one horn, and then the one horn broke off into four, and then you have the four-headed leopard, and they said the four-headed leopard is the same as the goat with one horn that turned into four horns, but and so they think there's this that represent the same thing, but just using different beasts to represent the same thing, which is possible, but I don't think it's likely for several different reasons. But those are basically the reasons why they believe that that's the that the beast star is of Daniel 7 is Medo Babylon, Medo Persia, Greece, and Rome, or Greece, and then you have the final empire, what Rome and whatever extends out of that, or however they break that down. So, for one, let's just start from the top. So, just because a lot of teachers teach it doesn't necessarily mean it's true. It just means it's just something to consider. That's it. It has nothing to do with why it's true. That's one. I'm not saying people use that as a fact to say why it's true. I'm just saying this is how people's minds work sometimes. That's one. Number two, when it comes to having strong ties with Israel, Great Britain and the United States of America has very strong ties with Israel. Humongous ties. It is like a humongously crucial part of what Israel does. Number two, when it comes to Russia, the Soviet Union released millions of Jews to go back to Israel when Israel became a land again. So that's kind of a big deal. Not only that, they have a huge part in foreign affairs, especially the Middle East, which affects Israel big time. Number three, I believe the leopard is Germany, like Irving Baxter said. I believe it's Germany because four heads represent rise and fall, and Germany we're in like the Fourth Reich right now. Hitler was the Third Reich. It was the Fourth Reich. Germany had like Reichs are, I guess, different eras of Germany's history. So, when you look at Daniel 17, you see that when it talks about the 7-headed 10-horn beast, the red 7-headed 10-horn beast that was a system. It says the 7 heads represented 7 mountains which the whore sitteth on, the whore of Babylon. And it also represented 7 kings. So it had a dual meaning. Mountains and kings. The kings, there were 5 that were fallen. 1 was, and 1 is yet to come. So they were consecutive. They weren't simultaneous. Unlike the horns, which it said, the 10 horns that was on the beast represented 10 kings that shall rule 1 hour with the beast. So these will rule with means at the same time. So, and then if you look at Daniel 8, and you saw the horns of Medo Persia, the Medo Persia was an empire with 2 kings at the same time. So the ram with 2 horns was the two kings that ruled at the same time. And when you saw the four horns protruding from the one horn and from the he goat, the four horns that protruded were four kings that ruled at the same time that came out of Alexander the Great's empire. So horns represent simultaneous kings, and heads represent consecutive. Horns represent simultaneous rulers, and heads represents consecutive rulers. Now, for one, let's just start here. For one, it talks about the beast. Like when the angel was talking to Daniel, he still told Daniel that these were four beasts, were four kings that shall arise, not that haven't arise, but shall arise. Okay, so these kings haven't arose yet. He didn't say any of these kings was current. And every time a king was current, they said it in. It seemed like they said it in the Bible. As far as somebody ruling, especially somebody who was ruling over Israel, when the statue was, the head of gold in the statue, Daniel told Nebuchadnezzar that head of gold represented him. When the ram and the he goat, there's no confusion on who they represented. It said the ram represented Greece in Medo-Persia, and the he goat represented Greece. When it in Revelation chapter 17, it says 5 were fallen, one is, and one is yet to come. It didn't say who the one was, but it did say that one was current to that day. So they did say one of those heads represented something current, but it said these beasts shall rise, as in future tense. When something will happen, it doesn't mean it doesn't mean it is happening. Otherwise, you use the word is, not will. And another thing is, when you look at the four beasts in Daniel, it talks about 3 of those beasts living after the time, during the time of the millennium. So the last beast, the beast with 7 heads, the beast with 10 horns, iron teeth, and brass nails, that beast was killed. But the other three beasts, their authority was taken away, and they were allowed to live for a time in the season. It says that in Daniel chapter 12. I'll just read it for you. Daniel chapter 7 verse 12 says, as according to the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season at a time. Okay, so just because a nation has authority doesn't take it away, doesn't mean it's dead. So it could be alive with authority, alive without authority, and it could be dead. So these are all different states. And that last beast was killed. Not only that, that last beast became a world empire while these other empires still had their authority. And that last beast was the only one that said that was ruled the world. As opposed with Daniel chapter 2, it told Nebuchadnezzar that you rule everywhere there was. Let's just read what it says in Daniel chapter 2, if I can find it. So, one moment. Daniel chapter 2. So, Daniel chapter 2, verse 38, it says, Daniel's given an interpretation. It said, Thou, O King of kings, for the God of heaven hath given you the kingdom, the power, and the strength, and glory. Whosoever the children of men, and the beasts of the field, and fowls of heaven hath given into thine hand, and thou shalt be made the ruler over all of them, and thou art a head of gold. And then he talked about the next one is going to be a silver, which is inferior. And then he talks about the brass kingdom, which is in verse 39. It says, the third kingdom shall be a kingdom of brass that shall rule of all the earth. Okay? So the first kingdom rules the earth. The third kingdom rules all the earth. And the 10 toes were said to, it didn't say too much about the 10 toes. It just says during that time the Messiah shall come. But the 10 toes were 10 rulers. It says in the time of these kings, talking about, and it talks about the kingdom of heaven shall be established. But those 10 kings, which I believe rightly so, is associated with the 10 horn kingdom of that last of Daniel 7. That seems like it's the only one, because that's the only beast in Daniel 7 that has any of the metals from the from Daniel chapter 2. Like, it has iron teeth and brass nails. And if the leopard represented Greece, like, which is the brass one, which pretty much we all can agree on, then then the leopard should have the not the last beast shouldn't have brass, but the leopard should have brass. Not only that, it's just the leopard is a different beast. The leopard is a different beast than the goat. Why is it using a different animal symbol, but it's using the same symbol as the little horn? Not only that, the four beasts in Daniel, it doesn't have a problem with reusing symbols for beast, as far as representative, reusing those beasts to symbolize something, because those beasts are represented in the beast of Revelation chapter 13. It says it's like a leopard, mouth of a lion, feet of a bear, and it had 10 horns. Now, that beast was a person, it wasn't a kingdom, but still, and those beasts in Daniel 7 represented kings and kingdoms, but still, it didn't have a problem with reusing it. Not only that, like it just said, like Babylon doesn't exist anymore. Medo-Persia doesn't exist anymore, and the first three beasts lived until after Jesus comes. It says their lives were prolonged. Babylon doesn't exist to any extent anymore at all. It is completely gone. Medo-Persia doesn't exist anymore. It talks about it being destroyed in Daniel chapter 8, and it kind of alludes to all the kingdoms in that line being destroyed in Daniel chapter 7, in Daniel chapter 2. In Daniel chapter 2 verse 35, I believe. I couldn't I'm wrong about that one. So in verse 44, I'm sorry. It says, "And in the days of these kings shall God in heaven set up a kingdom, and he shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break into pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall be forever." And verse 35. It was verse 35. That was verse 34, given the interpretation. And verse 35, it says, "There was an iron and clay and a brass and silver and gold, and broken into pieces together, and became like chaff in the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, and no place was found for them. And the stone smote the image, and it became great mountain, filled the whole earth." So these things look like they're being destroyed, but the four beasts worked. And not only that, like I've heard, like, so when you might hear some other explanations that say these beasts could represent anything. It's just like, who else is going to represent? Who else is going to represent? There's no major nation that looks like a bear or a lion with eagle's wings plucked up more than America in Russia. God is not going to mention some random nation tied to Israel. It should be tied to Israel somehow. Number two, and that's, I think, you know what? That's it. That's all I really have to say. So hopefully that provides some kind of explanation. But like I said, it's not the traditional interpretation. I know prophecy sometimes plays twice, because Jesus talked about the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, and that had already happened. So sometimes people might reconcile this all. It could be the old nations and something now. It's like, no, I don't think so. It represents something that's going to happen in the future, and because of how it says it, because of how it talks about it. And Daniel talks about the book, his book being sealed up until the time of the end, and we still don't know how all these prophecies going to play out. So until the end, we really don't know how everything is going to fully play out. But I do believe the lion with the eagle's wings being plucked is America, not Babylon, and the bear is Russia. I believe Germany is the most likely candidate for the leopard. If I'm wrong on that, well, that's not really something that's a big deal to me. And I do believe that the last beast is not the European Union, because it's diverse from all the other beasts. And the bear and the lion, the bear and the leopard represents Germany and Britain, and the European Union consists of Germany and Great Britain, as far as I know. Now it could be could they could separate from it. They could, but I just don't see it as being the European Union. I see it as something being more Middle Eastern due to how the other kingdoms that were mentioned played out. But that's my take on that topic. Hopefully, you learned something, and thank you for your time, and have a good night.